So from this, we can predict not just what direction price and quantity are going to change in, but also sort of how much in relative terms. We're going to see more of a price change than a quantity change, or the other way around. We can also think about what's this going to do to sort of the success of that market, right? How much money is going on. So take another example of these sort of dynamics in play. Let's look at agriculture, right? I talked before about what's going to happen if the price, if we get way more productive at making food, and I said we were going to sort of be over here. Well, that's exactly what has happened for the past 100 years. So basic demand for basic food commodities tend to be pretty inelastic. Like I said, there's no substitute for food. You're already buying the amount of food that you probably want to be buying for the most part. However, this is what agricultural productivity looks like, right? And what do we know about productivity? It's a determinant of supply. So if we get more productive and make it getting more stuff out of the same inputs, that means that our supply is shifting to the right? It's cheaper to produce a certain amount of food. So if we go back to 1880, you can see the amount of input that we put. That's like how many people were working in the agricultural sector, how much money we were spending on machinery and pesticides, things like that. And then over time, especially starting around 1940, we see this massive deviation, right? Just this huge split. We are getting massively more food than we used to out of the same amount of input, right? And this is a pretty big change. Like you look back again, like 1910, these were both around 200, and then by the year 2000, we have an 8-fold increase in the amount of food output, and basically no increase in the amount of input. So we're 8 times as productive at making food as we were about 100 years ago. That's a big supply shift, and it's a big supply shift in an inelastic market with inelastic demand. So we can predict what's going to happen. For all these different reasons, we see these increases in productivity. So we get a huge boom in the amount of food that we can make, which is great because it means that people don't starve so much anymore. And we actually have more of the opposite problem now, at least in rich countries. We can ask what's going to play out in terms of the market. So just like with the soldiers example, we have a supply increase in inelastic demand. We would expect that prices are going to drop by quite a bit. Now, one difference here is that it's not like, hey, the price of food went down. I want to eat a whole lot more food, but it's just going to take me some time to do it. Like that's not really going to apply here. So we wouldn't really expect this is going to get all that much more elastic over time. It's probably going to stay sort of like this, which means that we would not expect that sort of dip and then rise. We just sort of expect a dip. And that's what we see, right? Food is way cheaper than it used to be, right? Just like, I mean, by an unimaginable amount. Like if you go back 70 years, most of us would be spending a pretty big chunk of our incomes just on food. Probably if you think about how much you spend on rent and how much you spend on food, and you go back about 70 years, those percentages would probably be swapped in your budget, more or less. Yeah, if you spend a lot on rent, that's a lot that you'd be spending on food, right? So we can ask ourselves, what's this actually going to do in the agriculture market, right? We would think, well, they just got way more productive. They're way better at making food right now. They're probably going to get rich. And sort of, but we can think about what's going to happen here. So how much money is actually going into the agriculture market, right? How much revenue is being generated? Well, how much is being how much are they selling, right? Well, the amount of their money that they're going to make is how many units they sell, quantity, times how much they sell it for, price, right? That's the revenue. So we can find this because we know exactly where on our graph quantity and price are, right at the equilibrium point. So before, here was the price they were selling everything for. Here's the quantity. You multiply these two numbers together, you get a box, right? Here's the width of the box, here's the height, here's all the revenue they were making before all those productivity increases. How about afterwards? After the supply shift, here is the price of quantity. Here's the height of the box, here's the width of the box, right? And this whole box is how much revenue they're making. We compare the before to after, we can see that they lost some revenue because the prices have gone down. So they're making less on each unit that they sell, but they've also gained some revenue because they're selling more, right? And so whether they're making more or less than they used to is based on whether this box is bigger than this box, right? And what I can tell you is that the steeper this curve gets, right? You can sort of imagine, as I take this demand curve, and just make it steeper and steeper and steeper and steeper, this box is going to get narrower and narrower and narrower. And this box is going to get a little bit taller, but not much. And so the steeper this is, the bigger this box is going to be relative to this box. And actually, we're going to make less money going into the agricultural sector than it did before, right? So even though there was this massive increase in productivity, the market actually ended up making less money overall, which we can sort of imagine by thinking about, well, how much goes into that sector, right? Go back 100 years into these points where, we're down here, and like most of the people in this room would have been on a farm instead of in college, right? Most of our physical labor would have been spent growing food. A lot of us would have been on farms. So think about all the input, all the stuff that's going into it. All of our salaries would have depended on farming, right? So now it doesn't for a lot of us. So what we see is that, yeah, there's a lot less revenue going into the market. Now you might think, well, if this is going to lead to less revenue, why don't we just not make those productivity increases? And maybe they would have liked to, but the thing is with a competitive market is if somebody figures it out, then you don't want to be the one who's without it, because then you're just going to be losing out to your competition.